Hello, my name is Darian Chambers, and this assignment is for Module 5 for Financial Management and Enrollment. So, in this brief video, I will be going over auxiliary budgets as well as capital budgets, and focusing first on an auxiliary budget or an auxiliary, enterprise. Through research that I've done, you know, you can define an auxiliary budget or enterprise as an operation or a business that operates independently as its own cost center. And I'll get more into that here in a little bit. And typically, they're responsible for generating, their own revenue and income through a service that is charged or through a product that is sold. Now, when it comes to you know capital budgeting pretty much involves projects that pretty much add value to a company, and you know they process involvement in almost pretty much like anything that can benefit that company, whether it's land or adding a new building or adding a new feature or buying out another company to help them promote that current company to expand. Capital budgeting is very wide. Capital budgeting is also can be done by through investors, through a lot of different shareholders, and I'll have a couple examples here. So when I switch back to auxiliary budget here for a second, when I used to work for a company, and I'm sure we all know, when I say it, you'll know exactly what I'm talking about. I worked for Dollar Tree, and I was a district manager for them. So I was able to eventually understand the financials and how they did things. So we had auxiliary budgets as a unit, as a team. So as a district manager, I had about 18 or 19 stores, and each store operated independently on its own. Even though we were the same company, we operated independently, and each store was separated and competed against each other based off of the items that they sold. And ultimately what would happen with the money that was brought in, the revenue that was brought in, it was pumped right back into that same store through other vendors who basically worked on the buildings through fixing the plumbing, fixing the windows if they broke, fixing the roof when they leaked, just different things of that nature. And that was all done through selling products to customers. And it was difficult at times for some stores to make that money. So the projection that they were projected to do, each store had a different projection for that day as to what they would sell, and that was based off of the previous year's numbers. And that's what certain budgets were based off of. So if the budget was based from the year before, then the goal was to beat the year before. And that didn't always happen, unfortunately, as more stores popped up and other stores started competing with other stores, and the numbers kind of got funky. So I wasn't really a big fan of the auxiliary budgets, because you couldn't really, even though you were going off projection of last year, even though you wanted to beat it, it was difficult because there was a lot of, stores that were being cannibalized because of new stores that were being put up very close to, that other location. So, you're not going to do as good as you were doing last year with a store being built, a mile down the road from you that sells the same exact product. So I wasn't really a fan of auxiliary budgets at all, because certain things started to not being able to be fixed, and these newer buildings were sucking out of a lot of the money that these older locations were going to make. And unfortunately we didn't have the revenues to fix certain things, and some of the stores kind of went downhill, but that's another story. So switching back to capital budgets, one thing that Dollar Tree did was, and if you ever shopped there, a lot of the stores, some of them look pretty old, and this is through the company's capital budget, and the way they acquire the buildings. And this is like probably the best example that I can use for capital budgeting is they, as a company, opened up two 2,500 new stores in 2021. 2,500, that's a big number. That's just in the United States. And it's 2,500 new stores. And they do that through purchasing older buildings that are run down. So a lot of the stores that you go into that are Dollar Tree, a lot of them are, unfortunately, they look old. And it's because the company purchases old buildings at a cheaper rate. So that way they don't have to do a lot. All they have to do is, there's not a lot of overhead in the Dollar Tree company. Once they get these buildings, all they need is shelves and lights. Truly, that's all that they need. And scanning equipment. That's it. So a store I used to have to open up stores all the time. And the store would be put up as far as the sign. All they would do is strip the signs off of the old store. If it was like an old Walgreens or a old CVS or anything like that, they would strip that stuff down in about, 2 weeks, and the store is ready to be open by that third week. So overhead costs and just the way they do things is very old school and very, very minimal. So 2020 was a great year for the company. Unfortunately, not for everybody, but for the Dollar Tree company, it was great because they thrived at that time because a lot of businesses were closing. So in 2021, when I said they were able to open 2,500 stores, it was due to a lot of those businesses, small businesses, and some of those larger retailers as well that closed because they couldn't stay afloat due to the fact that, people weren't out shopping like they were at one point in time. And a lot of the businesses shut down. So Dollar Tree was able to grab these buildings at very, very cheap rates. But at the same time, it expanded their value because they were able to put their items into these stores at a very cheap rate and at a very cost efficient rate. So when this was being done and this was being done and happening, it was a great outcome for them, but not for the companies that unfortunately had to shut down. So, like I said, 2021, 2,500 new stores opened up post-COVID, which is unheard of. The year over growth was, it was ridiculous, and investors invested in them, stakeholders invested in them. A lot of different people backed them on this project. And ultimately, it took money from other stores. Like I said earlier, with the auxiliary budgets, there were so many stores being built that it was taking money from other Dollar Tree locations because of how close they were being put up. And it was kind of like a Starbucks situation. On every corner, you see a Starbucks. And now on every corner, you see a Dollar Tree. Same thing with Dollar General. They did the same exact thing. As I had, counterparts that worked for those and friends that worked at that company too. They did the same exact thing. And they just knew how to leverage that by buying the land and buying those buildings at such a cheap rate. But at the same time, it made the company as itself grow, and it helped their performance. It helped their projected growth. It helped their projected budget. They were able to do more and then acquire more buildings and put money back into the company. But ultimately, some of the numbers did get skewed and a little screwed up because the budgets were being projected, auxiliary budgets were being projected and other budgets were being projected based off of numbers from the previous year. But those are all flawed because they weren't taking into consideration all of these new stores and how close these new stores are being built to older stores. So although you're projecting this older store to do, $1 million more than they did the previous year, well, that's not possible if you just put a building or a new store, down the street, and that store is now taking those customers or taking that revenue. So a lot of the numbers were off. A lot of our logistics were off. It was actually a nightmare at a certain point because some stores were receiving way too much freight. and back rooms were getting filled up, and just a logistical nightmare at a certain point, due to projections being incorrect. But ultimately, we did use auxiliary budgets as well as capital budgets, and that's my brief explanation and example. So thank you so much for listening.